Good Saturday morning, everyone. Today on Perspectives, we're stepping back in time to bring you a complete perspective on Mobile's history. Mobile is more than 300 years old and, like most port cities, has a rich and unique story to tell. Amazingly, though, there are some voices from our past that are just now being heard, thanks to the dedication of one of Mobile's most engaging citizens, the late Dora Franklin Finley. Ms. Finley was one of the founders of the Dora Franklin Finley African American Heritage Trail. It's a tour that tells the story of Mobile's people of color who played an integral part in the port city's story. The trail begins when the settlement of Mobile was created and moves you to the present day. Now, currently, the tour has more than 40 stops from the slave market where Africans were sold and humanity forgotten, to the birthplaces of baseball greats like Hamlin Hank Aaron and the legendary Satchel Paige. The Heritage Trail also takes you to the homes, businesses, and churches that were pivotal in the civil rights movement. And the tour also offers you a celebration of many lives important to the port city's history, but not always remembered for their contributions. Sadly, Ms. Finley passed away in 2012, but her legacy lives on. The president of the organization, Carlos Finley, had this to say about the tour in an interview with the Alabama News Center.
And so what we hope is that people realize the power and the strength of this diversity and the togetherness so that we can move on to accomplish all that we know that our city, our state, our nation, our world is capable of.
Our guest this morning is Eric Finley, the tour coordinator for the Dora Franklin Finley African American Heritage Trail. Perspectives continues after this quick break. Our guest this morning, Eric Finley. He is the tour director and coordinator of the Dora Franklin Finley African American Heritage Trail project and program. Eric, we thank you for joining us this morning and being a part of this discussion about Black history and, of course, the history of Mobile. Let's talk first about what motivated Dora to initiate the development of the historic trail.
Well, thank you, Eric, for the invitation this morning. That's a good question because it actually goes back before Dora, and it was about, I guess, maybe 20 years ago. This is our 15th year for doing the tours here in Mobile. And one of our African American city councilmen by the name of William Carroll, he was on a business trip in Boston. And while there, he had some free time. He saw a sign that said Black Heritage Trail, and he took that tour. And he enjoyed it. And on his way back to Mobile, he got to thinking about the stories that he had heard his parents and grandparents tell about blacks in Mobile that had been very successful. And he thought this was something that we could do here because Mobile was close to 300 years old. So he started looking around the city for someone to take on the opportunity or the challenge. It just depended upon the perspective that they looked at it from. And after about 9 months, he found a young lady that said she would take on the opportunity. Her name was Dora Franklin Finley. And so Dora is my double first cousin.
Right.
And she accepted the opportunity, and she spent about 5 years doing research on African American individuals and places that had made significant contributions to the city of Mobile.
We're so glad that both Councilman Carroll and Dora decided to make this happen. You say that the history of Mobile, and we're talking about 300 years and more, is rich and unique. Why so?
Well, when we start our tours, we actually start from 1702, and it was King Louis XIV who hired 2 explorers out of Quebec, Canada, and they were the Lemoyne brothers. And at the time, he was trying to find a shortcut to New Orleans, and those gentlemen set sail for this area, ended up in Pensacola initially, and the Spanish was occupying Pensacola. They didn't want that war, so they headed west, took a little too sharp turn out in the Gulf, and ended up in the Mobile Bay, actually 27 miles north of Mobile in a place we all know as Chestang, Alabama. And an outbreak of yellow fever came about and pushed them back to Mobile. And at that point, they then started the city of Mobile. And as we know, Fort Condé in downtown Mobile today is a replica of the original city, and that replica was done in 1976 for the bicentennial celebration of the United States. Probably the original fort is somewhere in the bay over the Bankhead Tunnel. But one of the things that the king did was that he sent a second ship, and that second ship had females on it, and we've recently found out that those females were actually orphans from the Roman Catholic Church, and their chaperones were nuns, and he sent them to marry the soldiers to grow this area, and they did. And then there was a third ship to come. History is history. That third ship came from the Dominican Republic, and those ladies were concubines. And during this time, Mobile was somewhat of a, well, it was a seaport town, but it was kind of wide open, and the wives during that time allowed their husbands to have girlfriends as long as they were considered of a lesser social class. So again, through perspectives, from my perspective today, I would have to say that one group of ladies were orphans, one group of ladies were concubines. They were pretty much, probably to me, on the same level, but I guess it's the golden rule. He who holds the gold makes the rule. And the story that I'm leading up to, Eric, though, is that a lot of those ladies did have children, and those children today we know as Creoles. And so there's a large population of Creoles in Mobile, in Louisiana, and as a result of that, you know, we had a very diverse community during that time of Creoles, of free blacks, we had enslaved blacks, we had Indians, so we had a very diverse culture that started our great city of Mobile.
I tell you, it's fascinating when you hear the stories of the past, and of course, not taught in our history books like that, the truth of what happened and how these areas developed, and of course the founding fathers as well as the beginning people who end up populating and making the areas great. So tell us about the trail, and where do we start there when we look at some of the first African-American history of the area? Well,
we actually start our trail at Fort Condé to give us a perspective of the lay of the community, and then from there we actually have a marker at Cooper Riverside Park, and it's a UNESCO marker, and that marker highlights the ships that arrived in Mobile as far back as 1721 with illegally kidnapped individuals on them. Now, of course, we're all aware of the Clotilda, which we'll talk about, but there were ships as far back as 1721 that brought enslaved individuals into the port of Mobile. In fact, there were a lot of them. We have only been able to document about 3, where we were able to get the manifest and to validate and vet the information and submit it to the Mobile and Alabama Historical Societies.
Now, why do you say they were brought illegally? Was slavery illegal in the French territory at that time, or what was going on?
Well, in Africa, history records that there were, well, first of all, let's put Africa in perspective. You know, when we look at Europe, we see Spain, we see France, we see Italy, and all of those are different countries. And for some reason, when we look at Africa, we look at it as one country, but there are 57 different.
Exactly.
And so we have to understand that they're just as different as the European countries. And so you had different tribes, and they had different incentives, that they would be at war, and so one tribe might capture another tribe, and because you had Portugal and Spain and France, these countries at this point, purchasing these individuals, there were tribes that were capturing other tribes, and in some cases it was for economic reasons, it might have been for weapons, and that was their incentive. Well, at this time in America, cotton was king.
Yes.
And it was an economic, we might even say cotton was like white gold. And so there was a incentive, because these individuals were captured and brought to America to farm the lands. But what was different, Eric, is that slavery had existed for centuries, and it was based off of indentured servants. So a lot of these individuals could purchase their freedom and become a part of the company that bought them. But in America, we had a new type of slavery, something that had never ever existed anywhere in the world, and it was called chattel slavery. And chattel slavery was that these individuals were purchased like a piece of furniture or an animal, and they became the property of that individual for the rest of their lives. And so they performed labor free, as well as other desires of the individuals that purchased them during that time.
And to wrap this segment up as we go to a quick break, Eric, remind us of the marker that is in downtown Mobile that talks about the slave market.
We have a marker on Royal and St. Joseph Street. Now, I'm sorry, Royal and St. Louis. And that marker is the site of the slave market, where individuals were actually auctioned off during the 17 and 1800s. So it's the site, because it's only 2 blocks from the water.
Yes.
And one of the port docking areas used to be right at the end of St. Anthony Street. So they would come from Africa 2 to 3 months in the bottom of a ship, and they would store them in that building that was at that location for a couple of weeks, grease them up, get them looking healthy, and then bring them out on auction day to be purchased by individuals from this area and Mississippi and Florida, the surrounding states.
Right. Well, Eric, on that, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about the African American Historic Trail, as well as looking at the different markers that are around the area and how to take part in the trail here in the Mobile area. Our guest this morning, Eric Finley. More on Perspectives in just a moment. And our guest this morning again, Eric Finley. He is the tour director and coordinator of the Dora Franklin Finley African American Heritage Trail. And Eric, of course, sharing some very important information this morning. You know, I love to look at timelines, and when you see the parallels of what else is going on at the same time of some of these remarkable points of history, what are some of the historic parallels when you give the tour here in Mobile?
Eric, it's a challenge sometimes because I'm telling the story, which I love to do, and we tell our guests that, of course, we don't live in the past. I'm living in the present, and I wasn't living in the 1860s, and neither were they. But we have to understand what took place to try to put it in perspective. And you know, I keep using this word perspective. It's amazing, Eric, that you named
We
this
like
program.
that. We appreciate it.
Yes.
Thank you.
and I never thought about it until this morning as to how many times I use perspective on the tour. And it kind of reminds me of something I read. It was a quote that an author said that every story has 3 parts. I think my story, your story, and the truth.
Yes.
and all of them, and none of them are lies, but you know, and we do history 12 months a year.
Yes.
But everything that we do is validated and vetted. So we try to make our guests understand the perspective that we are telling the history from. And during the 1860s, when we talk about the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment, we talked about Abraham Lincoln when he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which today was the equivalent of an executive order. And we see, you know, the presidents in the past couple of years that implement executive orders and remove executive orders. And so Abraham knew that when he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed the slaves in the 11 Confederate states, that the next president could retrieve that and slavery would be legal again. So he vigorously worked to get the 13th Amendment passed, which it did, but it was after his assassination.
That's interesting you bring that point up, because the president that succeeded him was a Southerner who, of course, did reverse a lot of stuff and the end of some of the progress that had been made. So you are so on that to share that point.
Yes, so that was Andrew Johnson. In fact, if I recall, he was the first president to be removed from office because of his actions. And interesting enough, that things that we don't see in the history books was that a lot of the free blacks actually received 40 acres and a mule. And it's interesting that we find some of that property between South Carolina and Jacksonville, Florida. And today, you would be amazed to know what it is. It's an area that we call Hilton Head. And so,
yes.
But Andrew Johnson removed that executive order, and as we know, things began to change with the Compromise of 1867, when Rutherford B. Hayes became president. And I'll tell you, it seemed like it was a script similar to what we are experiencing right now, because there was a dispute in the voting between Florida, South Carolina, and Georgia. And then there was, one group had the popular vote, but was short by one electoral vote. And the decision was thrown into Congress, and and the Supreme Court, for it to be an equal decision. And one of those individuals on the Supreme Court resigned to become a congressman, which allowed Rutherford B. Hayes to become president. And the compromise was that he would then remove the federal troops from the South, which he did. But when he did that, that's when all of the changes took place, and that's when we saw all of the progress, because there were African-American congressmen. Louisiana had an African-American governor, and when those federal troops left, and that's when we started to seeing our first voter suppression. We saw the Klan that intimidated blacks from voting. The Jim Crow laws started. Plessy versus Ferguson was implemented by the Supreme Court, which is separate but equal. And then we just had lynchings and turmoil right up through the really 1950s to the 60s.
Yes,
yeah,
indeed.
When the Civil Rights Bill
Another
was passed.
opening of Pandora's box, which was opened back in 2016 again. We've got just a couple of minutes, Eric. Lay down a couple of things that you want people to take advantage of this month and throughout the year as it relates to the trail. Also, a couple other events taking place in the area as well this month.
Well, because of the pandemic right now, we're not doing any guided tours in the buses or vehicles, but we do have walking tours that are downtown Mobile that we start at the Cathedral Square, and we actually travel about a mile walking. We have about 10 markers in that area. So it's open air. Of course, we encourage everyone to wear a mask. Those are available by appointment through our local office on 251-725-2236. Access to our website, which is www.dffaaht.org, or you can Google or use your favorite search engine for Dora Franklin Finley African American Heritage Trail. And of course, we do tours 12 months a year. But there are some other events that are taking place in the city. For example, at the Mobile Public West Mobile Library on Grelot Road, they have an exhibit right now of P.H. Polk. He was the resident photographer at Tuskegee University in Tuskegee, Alabama. And we're glad to see the libraries and different venues that are now offering different types of access to
Eric,
history.
if you would, also mention quickly the at the Mobile Museum of Art, the Gordon Parks exhibit.
There's the
also.
Gordon Parks exhibit. Back in the 50s, he was executed to do he was directed to do a photo series on civil rights in the South, and that's at the museum in Langham Park.
And that includes Mobile's pre-segregation, I guess you could say pre-integration days there in that exhibit as well.
Exactly, and Mobile Parks and Recreation Department right now, they're doing a series on their Facebook, and it is most interesting and very comprehensive of Black history in Mobile.
Eric Finley, we never have enough time. We thank you so much for coming and sharing and getting us all excited about some things to take advantage of this month. And of course, we'll be showing the information about how to contact you on the website as well as the phone number for the walking tour. Eric Finley, again, thank you so much for being a part of Perspectives this day.
Thank you, Eric.
And for more information on the Dora Franklin Finley African American Heritage Trail Tours, you can call the number you see there on the screen. You can also check out their website at dffaaht.org. And please join us here next Saturday morning at 9 a.m. for Perspectives. I'm Eric Reynolds. Have a great week.
Thanks for watching Fox 10 News. Watch us live wherever you are, on our mobile, our streaming news app, and you can also watch us on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV.